United States President Joe Biden has commended President Bola Tinubu for his strong leadership, in his words, especially in the crisis triggered by the coup in Niger Republic. In a statement released by the White House during the second day of the G20 summit in India, the U.S. president commended Tinubu for preserving the rule of law in Niger and also acknowledged his national economic policies in Nigeria. The U.S. president added that America is committed to, in his words, reinforcing its long-standing relationship with Nigeria. Biden also acknowledged the steps taken by Tinubu's administration to reform Nigeria's economy. He thanked the Nigerian president for his strong leadership as the chair of ECOWAS towards defending democracy and preserving the rule of law in Niger and the broader region. Also, in a bid to strengthen international partnerships and promote local investment and wealth creation, President Bola Tinubu has held meetings with the leaders of Germany, South Korea, and India on the sidelines of the G20 summit. According to presidential spokesman Ajuri Ngelale, President Tinubu discussed agricultural, defense, and fintech prospects with India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, manufacturing collaboration with South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol, and economic cooperation with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. President Tinubu also had informal exchanges with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and World Bank President Ajay Banga, among others. Although Nigeria is not a member of the G20, Tinubu was invited to the summit by the Prime Minister Modi. Right, the president has been busy.
Yeah. I mean, the president has been busy. Yes, some commendation there coming by President Biden as regards leadership, as regards what happened in Niger. That's quite double-edged, because a lot of people will say otherwise. A lot of people will say, maybe we're quite impetuous. We should have talked to the Nigerians a little longer before we threatened that we're going to go in there and invade. But the Americans pretty much wanted us to take a tough, definitive stand. Hence, the President Biden saying kudos to President Tinubu as regards strong leadership. Concerning also talking to foreign leaders for trade and investment, which is a good one, which is what we want. But until it materializes, we cannot say, oh, this has been successful. It takes a lot of effort to be able to actualize what we have talked about. You can sound off rhetoric, yes, but until the Germans now come in and say we want to build industries here and put money into this economy, then that's when it will have materialized. And these things are not new. In the 70s, we had the proliferation of a lot of foreign companies coming into Nigeria. We had the likes of Peugeot Automobile of Nigeria. We also have Volkswagen of Nigeria. And these companies were here until the economy started to go awry in the late 80s, and they left. In fact, speaking of Germany, we have a long time standing partnership with Germany. Germany in the late 1800s used to be one of our biggest trading partners. In fact, as at 1898, there was a particular advert on the Lagos Weekly Record that showed that there was a steamroller, a line direct from Lagos, Nigeria to Hamburg. It was run by Sea Woman. It was called the Woman Line, where Nigerians could go to Germany and vice versa. The Germans too could come here. A direct line that passed through Plymouth to Germany. And the likes of Gottlieb Glacy were prominent German businessmen in Nigeria that added a lot to the economy here. So are we potentially going to reverse all of that we used to have? And for further reading, you can check Ed Keazor's book. He wrote an extensive book on Nigeria and German trade relations that date back to hundreds of years. Are we going to get back to those days? And the other question will be, how can we also build our own small businesses here? To be like what the Germans call the Mittelstaats. Their own small businesses that are now multinationals all over the world. I'm also happy we talked to the Koreans. How can we also help our small businesses to be like the Shables of the Koreans? That's what we should also think about. I'm also happy we talked to the Indians. How can our businesses also be like the Indians, the Indujas and the likes that are coming to invest here? So in all of this, the talk is good, but we want to see results on ground.
Well, on the whole, I think it's been very good outing for President Tinubu, who I say, incidentally, is the chief foreign affairs officer of the country. Every other person will just be assisting him. And he's been in India, New Delhi, for almost a week now. Yeah. And during the period, he used the opportunity to attract investment. A figure of $14 billion has been put to that, securing commitments from different Indian companies on the basis of cooperation. Nigerian business people also had the opportunity to participate, in what is called the B20. So in terms of the optics, you say it's very good outing, along the lines of what the presidency calls economic development diplomacy. And then, of course, when the summit itself started, Nigeria, maybe not being a member, of course, as we know, got the opportunity to pump hands, to take pictures, to meet with world leaders. And in this regard also, President Tinubu was stressing economic diplomacy, key partnership with key countries like Germany, yes, of course, India, yes, of course, and then South Korea. And these are countries with which we already have trade partnerships. But the thing is how to deepen it and how to follow through. Now, many of these international summits that we attend, I've kept saying, we may sign 1,000 MOUs. Those MOUs will amount to nothing if we don't follow up. So the ball is now in the court of the foreign affairs team of the country to make sure that, all those assurances, all those pledges, that Nigeria, follows up, in various regards. The other thing to note also is that, yes, Nigeria may not be a member of the G20, but President Tinubu used the opportunity of his appearance there to stress the point that the G20 will be incomplete without Nigeria. But the thing, of course, is that, look, you are only invited to the party on the basis of your strength. Now, as of today, there are about 23 countries in the G20, as it were, or maybe 21 or 22 or so. If you count the individual countries, and then you count the European Union as a bloc, and also the African Union, which had just been admitted. But if Nigeria says, oh, we have to be a member of the G20, do we have what it takes? Do we have that competitive edge, that competitive advantage to be identified as an industrialized, developed country? So that, for me, exists only at the level of aspiration. But to see President Tinubu with all the photo ops, with the commendation from President Biden and others, including even the South Korea president, who has been invited to visit Nigeria, and the German president, who has also said he too will visit Nigeria in October. It gives a veneer of legitimacy on the international scene, although the real legitimacy can only come from the Nigerian people. But it shows international acceptance. And we've seen President Tinubu, showing up as chairman of ECOWAS, showing up at the African Union, and now at the G20. So all of this, when you add together, gives the government, or the administration, a certain kind of momentum that you cannot ignore. And incidentally, he leaves, New Delhi, and he goes straight to the Middle East, Abu Dhabi, again in search of investments from that flank, from the Middle East. So you see President Tinubu, somebody who knows the game, and he seems to be playing the game very well. But the ceremonies are not enough. The photo opportunities are not enough. What will be important, what will be of interest to us as Nigerians, will be concrete deliverables. How can we use all of these partnerships to transform Nigeria not into a provider of raw materials for the developed world, but also as a center of production, of creativity, of opportunities for the average Nigerian, and not as a dumping ground, and not as a mono economy that when you look at foreign trade, which Rotus was looking at last week, all you see there is just, we export crude oil, and then we import petrol, and then we export petrol oil, whereas there are vast opportunities, within this economy. And we hope that this economic development diplomacy, using their term again, will translate into, greater activity within the economy for the benefit of the Nigerian people, beyond photo opportunities.
Absolutely. So investment is one of the key takeaways from Nigeria's presence at G20 summit, as has already been established. Nigeria is not a member of G20, even though there are questions that have been raised even around that with regards to it not being one of the most advanced economies in the world, or most advanced countries in the world. However, the president has tried to leverage his attendance based on invitation by the Prime Minister of India at the G20 summit to hold some key conversations and discussions with some countries that were present. I'd like to focus on the South Korean engagement, especially with the president of South Korea, who had mentioned that South Korean investors were interested in 3 areas in Nigeria: 1, education; 2, technology; 3, energy. And this is quite important because when we look at South Korea and some lessons on things that we can glean from the nation in terms of investment, then there are a number of things that we can possibly work out with regards to a relationship to benefit both countries. In education, South Korea is actually one of the most advanced when it comes to their what is described as a militant approach to education. In fact, there are a number of similarities shared with Nigeria in terms of aspirations being edged on how educated you are. In fact, South Korea is said to have one of the most educated workforce in the world. And this has come about by a very dedicated and intense address with regards to education, from basic education right through to tertiary education. And because this has come up quite strongly in this particular administration and its economic impact on a nation, then it's something that we could possibly look to having some form of relationship where we can borrow some, there's some learnings we can gain from the South Korean model. The United Kingdom has praised South Korea for its investments in education, the same with the United States, especially during Barack Obama. And so perhaps there's some areas that we can pick out from. One of the things they've mentioned is that South Korea is driven to ensuring that there is a translation from going from basic education, secondary education to tertiary education, and being able to offer quality education. So we welcome that investment in Nigeria. In terms of technology, when we look at technology across the world, you cannot talk about technology and its advancement, especially broadband penetration, without looking at South Korea, and that's something else. And the Minister for Digital Economy, Communications and Digital Economy has been briefing. If you check his Twitter page, social media handle, he's been talking about some key conversations he's had with some, at the G20 summit. And then finally, of course, energy, biofuel, and how it has impacted electricity in South Korea is something to also study. And hopefully, as the president has mentioned, beyond the conversations, it's also to sustain and maintain the attraction he's going to sell to the international community as to why they should and must invest in Nigeria at this time. A number of things to talk about, and I'm sure that when Professor Bolaji Akinyemi joins us later on in the show, we'll have some time to dissect some of those conversations and see perhaps how Nigeria can position itself better as investment destination in the next few months and few years to get that revenue that we need, critically at this time. We'll move on to our next story, and that is that a British Royal Navy ship, HMS Trent, arrived Lagos yesterday from Ghana. The ship is on a 6-day port call at the Apapa port in Lagos. The visit is geared towards strengthening the bilateral relations between Nigeria and the United Kingdom, as well as enhancing maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea. Addressing journalists on board the ship, Commander Tim D. Langford of the British Royal Navy Commanding Officer of HMS Trent, alongside the British Deputy High Commissioner Johnny Baxter, expressed their commitment and cooperation with the Nigerian Navy.
In 2021, we came alongside. Nigeria remains a preferred partner for the United Kingdom. We've got some close and historical ties with the Nigerian Navy, and I think we would have been straight back the following year if it hadn't have been for the global pandemic. And it was unfortunate, I think, for all of us that we didn't have the opportunity to come straight back. Looking towards how we can identify potentially future solutions for countering insecurity within the Gulf of Guinea and the region. Looking at activities such as counter-piracy, counter-narcotics activity, and other illicit and illegal activity that takes place on the high seas, such as the increasing trend trend of things like illegal fishing and unauthorised fishing activity in individual nations' territorial waters and coastlines. But a lot of the discussion will definitely centre around counter-piracy activity. Is one of the things that I think that all nations have got a responsibility to address.
This visit is a fantastic, tangible evidence of the UK's position and how important relationships with countries like Nigeria are. We work together. We are pleased to be supporting the Nigerians. We're very clear that working together is the only way of resolving the kind of problems that are facing the Gulf of Guinea, and it's good that the UK can provide a positive role in that. Nigeria is a massive country for Africa. It has the second largest economy, it has the largest population, and for all of us, for Africa and for the UK, it is critical that Nigeria is stable, is safe, and is prosperous, and that's what we want to achieve. And within that, it is fantastic to see that trade between Nigeria and the UK is currently valued at £7.6 billion, and that has been increasing dramatically.
Fine.
All right. So, I mean, this story just shows the partnership between Nigeria and Britain, bilateral partnership. We all know how much the Gulf of Guinea spans, and it's not only the UK government that does this. There's also one the Americans done called the Americans also partake in called the Urban Game Express that they normally have every year, which is, to deepen maritime security. They get their people in. There are a lot of games around, the stretch of the Gulf of Guinea that spans many nations. In fact, it spans a lot of nations across this African coast. And it is just, like they said, to be able to deepen the fight against, piracy on our waters, narcotics trade and all of that. I mean, for one too many times we hear narcotics trade and piracy on our water. And also, to be able to deepen the fight against crude oil theft. Increasingly, we are hearing a lot of crude oil theft across our waters. Only recently across the stretch, you had Tantita and the Navy going neck and neck as regards chasing a particular vessel that wanted to take crude oil out. So it deals with all of that. It's just providing that level of maritime security across our waters, and the British is doing it just like the Americans would do and all of that. But I think going forward, what is paramount is, when will Africa be able to effectively build its own naval capacity to be able to secure its waters? This idea that it is only foreign nations that have bigger naval capacities that will help us and lead the way and all of that, Africa should be able to grow beyond all of this. If you look back, most of the African nations gained their independence in 1960, and predominantly they don't have adequate naval capacity. And I think that should be the real thrust of the matter.
Right.
Well, the HMS Trent, is on an African mission, and it's been deployed to West Africa for a period of 3 months. And the issues, as has been pointed out in that video, is about checking piracy, enhancing maritime security, illicit trafficking along the Gulf of Guinea. There's a body called Friends of the Gulf of Guinea, with regard to ensuring maritime security within that zone. Now, the Gulf of Guinea being one of the most notorious, of its type. The other Gulf that is also equally notorious is the Gulf of Aden, in Africa. And so you have the British, sending this warship on a mission to Africa. But it's not just about cooperation. There's also enlightened self-interest in the matter. Along the Gulf of Guinea, the British trade. They have trade running to about £6 billion per annum, within the Gulf of Guinea. And the Gulf of Guinea, so even for the British, security is important, as it is important to other countries. Part of it, of course, is cooperation, collaboration. And the Nigerian Armed Forces, we seem to have had a long-standing relationship. But the issue is, do we have the capacity? Not just in Nigeria, but let's say West Africa. Why is it that African countries are unable to patrol, monitor, secure the Gulf of Guinea? That's part of the challenge that we have here. If you look at under international law of the sea, you have the responsibility to secure, your coastline, your, maritime zone. But we seem to drop the ball all the time. And that's why in Nigeria, we're always talking about crude oil theft. We're always talking about, piracy, illicit trafficking. But now that the Tinubu government appears to be focusing on what he calls blue economy, Now, securing the maritime zone should be a priority for that administration, beyond just creating this new Ministry of Marine and Blue Economy that we've been talking about. So at the level of collaboration, fine. But we also need to develop the capacity. I read a recent interview by President Obasanjo in which he was talking about the number of ships that he bought at a time and how those ships were, how they were just mismanaged. We have something we call Nigerian Shippers Council. We have all these, institutions, but are they functioning? That is the question. Beyond the ceremony of just saying a British warship, HMS Trent is visiting and all that. No. The real substance of it is securing the maritime zone and developing that blue economy in a sense, in a manner that it will be to the benefit of the Nigerian economy.
Yeah, well, according to the commanding officer, Commander Tim Langford, he had mentioned that part of their task in docking here in Nigeria, as part of the Friends of the Gulf of Guinea, is to build capacity and to train. And I believe that that's one area where we can leverage. But beyond the training and building of building capacity, because this is not the first time HMS Trent has docked here, on our coastline, it is also the ability to take it forward. So, number one, the will to actually, when it comes to training and capacity building, to then replicate that for our own Navy. And then number two, of course, one of the challenges we've had, even though quite a huge percentage of money is allocated to the defense in the budget, is funding as well. Because if we must secure, or if we will be able to secure our coastline as a nation, we must also be able to get the funding and tackle corruption. Referring again to that interview that former President Olusegun Obasanjo had said, whereby they would buy ships and then there was a lot of corruption around the way it would be bought and resold to the Nigerian government, and just that, or some ships missing that were paid for, lack of accountability, especially with regards to securing our coastline. So those are some of the issues. However, in its own way, the United States has, HMS, the UK, I beg your pardon, has worked with Nigeria in this regard, and their capacity, or what they're hoping to do, is to work together for their own interests, because they do have quite heavy trade on the coastline, but also very importantly as well, the benefit for us as Nigeria is to build capacity, is to have our officers trained, is to hopefully be able to build our own security operations on that coastline.